Before we begin the story, if you're interested in true law enforcement horror stories, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Your support helps us bring you more chilling stories from officers who have experienced unexplained events. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and your thoughts on the story. Hearing from our community around the world makes us very, very happy. My name is Sergeant Michael Durant, and I've been with the Massachusetts State Police for 17 years. I've worked everything from highway patrol to homicide investigations, seen accidents that would make your stomach turn, dealt with criminals who'd look you dead in the eye without a hint of remorse. I thought I'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. I was wrong. What happened along Route 3 in Rockland during the winter of 1991 wasn't the worst of humanity. It was something else entirely. It started on February 14th, Valentine's Day. I remember because my wife Karen had made plans for dinner at that Italian place in Quincy she loved. I'd promised her I'd be home by 6. I should have known better than to make promises when you work the late shift. The call came in around 4:30 in the afternoon, just as the winter sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and purple. Dispatch's voice crackled through my radio. "Trooper Durant, we've got a report of an abandoned vehicle on Route 3 southbound, mile marker 42, just past the Rockland exit. Vehicle's been there for approximately 3 hours. No sign of the driver. Can you respond?" I was already on Route 3 heading north toward the barracks in Norwell. Mile marker 42 was only about 10 minutes south of my position. I flipped on my lights and executed a U-turn across the median. "Roger that, dispatch. En route to mile marker 42. Do we have a vehicle description?" "Blue, 1987. Honda Accord. Massachusetts plates. Registration comes back to a Sandra Whitmore, age 34, address in Brockton. No wants or warrants. Abandoned vehicles weren't unusual on Route 3, especially in winter. The highway runs right through the heart of the South Shore, connecting Boston to Cape Cod, and it's notorious for breaking down cars and testing even the most careful drivers when the weather turns bad. But something about this one felt off. 3 hours was a long time for a vehicle to sit unattended, and we'd had clear, cold weather all day. No mechanical reason for a breakdown, no storm to explain someone walking away from their car. I found the Honda exactly where dispatch had indicated. It was parked on the shoulder, hazard lights still blinking their rhythmic warning into the growing dusk. The car was coated in a thin layer of frost, and snow had begun to accumulate on the roof and hood. I pulled up behind it, ran the plates again myself to confirm what dispatch had told me, then grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the cold. The temperature had dropped below 20 degrees. My breath came out in thick white clouds as I approached the vehicle. I could hear the distant hum of traffic on the highway, the occasional whoosh of a car passing by, but otherwise the area was eerily quiet. The pine trees that lined this stretch of Route 3 stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. The Honda's doors were all locked. I peered through the driver's side window, shining my flashlight inside. The car was tidy, almost obsessively so. No trash, no personal items scattered on the seats. The keys were still in the ignition. That detail made my stomach tighten. Nobody walks away from their car with the keys still in it, not unless something urgent pulled them away, or something scared them. I tried the driver's door, confirming it was locked, then walked around the vehicle, checking each door and examining the ground around the car. The snow on the shoulder was disturbed, footprints leading away from the driver's side door. I followed them with my flashlight beam. They headed down the embankment toward the tree line, then disappeared into the woods. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, Trooper Durant, I'm at the scene. Vehicle is locked, keys in ignition, no sign of foul play." I've got footprints leading into the woods off the shoulder. Looks like one person, possibly female based on the shoe size. I'm going to follow the tracks into the tree line. Copy that, Trooper Durant. Be advised, temperature's dropping. We're expecting another cold front to move through after dark. I made my way down the embankment, my boots crunching in the frozen snow. The footprints were clear at first, easy to follow, but as I entered the tree line they became more sporadic, harder to track. The pine forest here was dense, blocking out what little remained of the daylight. My flashlight became my only source of illumination, creating moving shadows that danced between the tree trunks. I'd followed the tracks for maybe 50 yards when they suddenly stopped. Not gradually, not like the person had turned around or changed direction. They just ended, right in the middle of a small clearing. I stood there, slowly rotating in a circle, shining my light in every direction, nothing. No continuation of the tracks, no sign of where Sandra Whitmore had gone. The wind had picked up, making the trees creak and groan. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped with a sound like a gunshot, making me jump. I was a state trooper with 17 years of experience, and I was jumping at tree branches. I needed to get a grip. Dispatch, I've lost the trail. Footprints terminate in a clearing approximately 50 yards from the vehicle. No sign of the subject. I'm going to expand my search. Copy that. Be careful out there, Mike. The dispatcher using my first name instead of my badge number told me she was worried. That made 2 of us. I spent another 20 minutes searching the area, moving in widening circles around where the footprints had ended. The temperature continued to drop and I could feel the cold seeping through my uniform jacket. My fingers were starting to go numb despite my gloves. I was about to call off the search and request additional units when I saw something that made me stop cold. About 30 yards to my left, barely visible in the beam of my flashlight, was another clearing. And in that clearing, illuminated by the moon that had risen above the trees, was a car. Another car, abandoned in the middle of the woods. I approached it carefully, my hand instinctively moving to rest on my service weapon. It was a red Ford Taurus, older model, maybe mid-80s. The car was covered in a thick layer of pine needles and forest debris, like it had been sitting here for a long time. But when I got closer, I could see that the layer of snow on the roof was relatively fresh, no more than a few days old. The doors were unlocked. I opened the driver's side door and immediately noticed the smell. That musty, stale odor of a vehicle that's been closed up for a while. The interior was empty, except for a woman's purse on the passenger seat. I picked it up carefully using a pen to hook the strap. Inside was a wallet. The license belonged to Margaret Heigl, age 41, address in Quincy. The license had been issued in 1989. My radio crackled. Trooper Durant, what's your status? I found another vehicle, red Ford Taurus. Appears to have been here for several days. I've got a purse with ID. Running the plates now. I copied down the plate number and called it in. While I waited for dispatch to run it, I examined the car more carefully. Like the Honda on the highway, there were no signs of struggle, no damage to the vehicle. The keys were in the ignition. I tried to start it, but the battery was dead. Trooper Durant. That vehicle was reported stolen in January of 1990. Last seen in Quincy. The owner, Margaret Heigl, was reported missing the same day. January 1990. That was over a year ago. I stood there in the dark forest, looking at this car that had been missing for over a year, sitting less than 100 yards from where another woman had apparently vanished just hours ago. Dispatch. I need backup out here. I need someone to secure the Honda on the highway, and I need help searching these woods. We might have a situation. Copy that. Dispatching additional units to your location. I backed away from the Taurus, suddenly very aware of how alone I was in these woods. The trees seemed to press in closer, the shadows between them deepening. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and rapid in the cold air. Somewhere in the distance, branches creaked and cracked in the wind. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this frozen forest. A radio. Or rather, the static of a radio, that distinctive white noise hiss. It was faint, barely audible, but it was definitely there, and it was coming from deeper in the woods. I should have waited for backup. That's what training tells you to do. But I was thinking about Sandra Whitmore, about Margaret Heigl, about whoever else might be out here. If there was even a chance someone was alive and needed help, I couldn't just stand around waiting. I followed the sound deeper into the forest. The static grew gradually louder as I walked, guiding me through the trees like some kind of twisted beacon. My flashlight beam swept back and forth, illuminating pine trunks and snow-covered undergrowth, but nothing else. No sign of people, no sign of any source for the radio sound. After about 10 minutes of walking, I came to a small ravine. The sound of static was louder here, echoing off the rock walls. I started to make my way down the slope, using my free hand to steady myself against trees and boulders. Halfway down, my foot slipped on an icy rock, and I went down hard, sliding the rest of the way to the bottom. My flashlight flew from my hand, and I heard it clatter against rocks before the light went out. For a moment, I just lay there in the darkness, trying to catch my breath and assess whether I'd injured myself. My shoulder ached where I'd hit the ground, and I could feel the cold wetness of snow soaking through my uniform pants, but nothing seemed broken. That's when I realized something that made my blood run colder than the snow around me. The static had stopped. The forest was completely silent. Not the normal silence of a winter night, but an absolute, oppressive silence. No wind, no creaking trees, no distant traffic sounds from the highway. Nothing. I fumbled for my backup flashlight, the small one I kept clipped to my belt. My fingers were so cold they could barely grip it, but I finally managed to turn it on. The beam was weaker than my main flashlight, but it was enough to see by. I was at the bottom of the ravine, surrounded by large boulders covered in ice and moss. The walls of the ravine rose about 15 feet on either side of me, and there, directly in front of me, was something that shouldn't have been there. A car. Another car. This one was a green Buick, early 80s model. It was wedged between two boulders, its front end crumpled from what must have been a significant impact. But what made my heart start racing wasn't the crash damage. It was the radio. The car's radio was on. The dial glowed faintly in the darkness, and as I watched, the static started again, soft at first, then gradually building in volume. But there was something wrong with the sound. It wasn't normal radio static. There was a rhythm to it, almost like breathing. In and out, in and out. I approached the Buick slowly, my small flashlight beam shaking slightly as my hand trembled. I could see someone in the driver's seat. A woman slumped over the steering wheel. I reached through the broken window and checked for a pulse, already knowing what I would find. Her skin was ice cold. She'd been dead for a long time. The static from the radio suddenly changed pitch, becoming a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. I jerked my hand back from the corpse and backed away from the car. That's when I noticed the dashboard. Every light was on. The hazards, the high beams, the radio display. The battery should have been dead years ago, but somehow the car still had power. The whine from the radio abruptly cut out, replaced by a voice. It was female, distorted and distant, like it was coming from very far away. Route 3, mile marker 42, they're waiting. Then static again, and silence. My radio crackled, making me jump. Trooper Durant, backup is arriving at your location on the highway. What's your 20? I tried to respond, but my voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again. I'm in a ravine, approximately quarter-mile into the woods from the highway. I've found another vehicle with a deceased occupant. I need forensics and a recovery team. Copy that. Can you make it back to the highway? Yeah, I'm heading back now. I took one last look at the Buick, at the dead woman behind the wheel, at the radio that should have been dead but wasn't. Then I started climbing out of the ravine. It took me nearly 30 minutes to find my way back to the highway. I must have gotten turned around in the dark because I came out about 100 yards south of where I'd entered the woods. 2 state police cruisers were parked behind the Honda, their lights painting the scene in alternating blue and red. My partner, Trooper Lisa Heigl, was waiting for me. "Jesus, Mike, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said as I emerged from the tree line. "I found 3 more cars in there," I told her. 3 more abandoned vehicles. One of them has a body. Her expression turned serious. "Show me." "It's not safe. We need to wait for daylight, bring in a proper search team." "What do you mean it's not safe? What else did you find?" I looked back at the dark tree line, at the pine forest that suddenly seemed full of malevolence. "I don't know, but something's not right out there." We secured the scene and waited for the forensics team to arrive. While we waited, I ran the plates on the Buick I'd found in the ravine. It came back as belonging to a vehicle reported missing in 1987, 4 years ago. The owner's name was Patricia Morrison, age 38, last seen leaving her job at a hospital in Brockton. She never made it home. 4 years, Lisa said quietly. She's been sitting in that ravine for 4 years, and nobody found her? "These woods are deep," I said, "and that ravine is hidden. If you didn't know it was there, you'd never find it." "What about the radio? You said it was still working." I nodded. All the lights were on, and I heard a voice. "What kind of voice?" I hesitated, not sure I wanted to repeat what I'd heard. It sounded crazy even to me. "A woman's voice. She said something about Route 3 and mile marker 42. Said they're waiting." Lisa looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or doubt. "Mike, you've been out in the cold for over an hour. Sometimes, I know what I heard," I said, more sharply than I intended. "And I know what I saw. That radio shouldn't have been working, but it was." The forensics team arrived around 8 p.m., along with additional troopers to help with the search. I led them back into the woods, this time taking a more direct route to the ravine. We found the Buick exactly where I'd left it, still wedged between the boulders. But the radio was dark now, no lights, no static. The battery, as expected, was completely dead. The medical examiner confirmed that the woman in the driver's seat was Patricia Morrison. Based on the state of decomposition and other factors, she'd been dead for approximately 4 years, consistent with when she'd gone missing. Cause of death appeared to be blunt force trauma from the crash, though they'd need to do a full autopsy to be certain. "Strange place to crash," the MEE said, looking around the ravine. "This is pretty far from the highway. How did she end up down here?" That was a good question. The ravine was at least a quarter mile from Route 3, through dense forest. There were no roads, no trails, nothing that would explain how a car ended up wedged between boulders in the middle of nowhere. We spent the next several hours searching the area. The teams found the Ford Taurus I'd discovered earlier, and then, just before midnight, they found something else. 2 more vehicles, both hidden in different parts of the forest. One was a pickup truck from 1988, the other a minivan from 1985. Both were registered to people who'd been reported missing. Both had been there for years. 5 vehicles, 5 missing people. All of them along the same stretch of Route 3, all within a quarter mile of mile marker 42. And one of those people, Sandra Whitmore, had vanished just hours ago. We never found Sandra Whitmore that night. By 2 a.m., the search was called off due to the cold and the darkness. We'd resume at first light with additional resources, including a helicopter with thermal imaging. I drove back to the barracks in Norwell as the sun was starting to rise, exhausted and deeply unsettled. Karen was already up when I got home. She took one look at me and didn't say anything about the missed dinner reservation. She just made me coffee and sat with me while I tried to process what I'd seen. "You should get some sleep," she said finally. "You look exhausted." "I keep thinking about those cars," I said. "Why there? What's in those woods that would make 5 different people abandon their vehicles and walk into the forest?" "Maybe they weren't abandoned," Karen suggested quietly. "Maybe they were taken." It was a thought that had been nagging at the back of my mind all night, but I hadn't wanted to voice it. The idea of someone or something luring people off Route 3, leading them into the woods, was too disturbing to contemplate. I managed a few hours of fitful sleep before my phone rang at 10 a.m. It was Lieutenant Morrison, my commanding officer. "Mike, we've got another one." I was instantly awake. Another vehicle. Another abandoned vehicle. Route 3 southbound, mile marker 43. Woman called it in about 20 minutes ago. Said she was driving past and saw a car sitting on the shoulder with the door open and nobody around. Mile marker 43. Less than a mile from where we'd found Sandra Whitmore's Honda yesterday. "I'm on my way," I said. The vehicle was a silver Toyota Camry, 1990 model. The driver's side door was indeed open and the car was empty. But this time, we had a witness. The woman who'd called it in was still there, sitting in her own car with a state trooper taking her statement. Her name was Jessica Porter, and she was badly shaken. "I saw her," Jessica kept saying. "I saw the woman. She was standing right there by the car, and then she just walked into the woods." "Can you describe her?" I asked. "Blonde hair, maybe 30 years old. She was wearing a blue coat and jeans. She was just standing there by the car, looking at the woods." I slowed down, was going to ask if she needed help, but before I could stop, she started walking, just straight into the trees like she was following something. "Did you see what she was following?" Jessica shook her head. "Nothing. There was nothing there. But she walked into those woods like she was being led." We searched the woods around mile marker 43 for hours. We found the woman's footprints, just like we'd found Sandra Whitmore's. And just like before, they ended in a clearing with no indication of where she'd gone. The woman's name was Rebecca Torres. She was a 32-year-old accountant from Weymouth, and according to her husband, she'd been on her way to work when she disappeared. She'd called him from her cell phone at 7:45 a.m. to say she was running late because of traffic on Route 3. That was the last time anyone heard from her. 2 women in less than 24 hours. Same stretch of highway, same pattern. Walk into the woods and vanish. Lieutenant Morrison pulled me aside as the search teams were preparing to call it a day. "Mike, I'm bringing in the FBI. This is beyond our scope now." I nodded. It was the right call, but I felt a strange possessiveness about the case. These were my woods, my highway, my missing women. "There's something else," Morrison said. "We pulled the records for this section of Route 3 going back 20 years. Missing persons reports, abandoned vehicles, anything unusual. There's a pattern." He showed me a printout of cases. Every year, in February, we get reports of abandoned vehicles and missing people along this stretch of highway. Sometimes it's one person, sometimes more. But it always happens in February, and it always centers around mile marker 42. I stared at the list. 20 years of disappearances all within a 1-mile radius of the same spot. How had nobody noticed this before? "The cases are spread out over 2 decades, Morrison said, reading my mind. "Different troopers, different jurisdictions, different investigators. Nobody connected them until now. But look at this." He pointed to a note at the bottom of the page. In 1971, there was a major accident at mile marker 42. A school bus went off the road during a snowstorm. 17 children died. The quarries. Of course, I'd grown up hearing stories about the old quarries near Rockland. They'd been closed in the 1960s after a series of accidents, filled with water and fenced off. The school bus had crashed into one of the quarries, breaking through the winter ice. They'd recovered most of the bodies, but some had never been found, lost in the deep, dark water of the flooded quarry. "You think this is connected to the bus accident?" I asked. Morrison shrugged. "I think there's something about this place that's wrong. Whether it's the quarries, the bus accident, or something else entirely, I don't know. But people keep disappearing here, Mike, and they keep disappearing in February." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those 17 children at the bottom of the quarry, about Sandra Whitmore and Rebecca Torres walking into the woods like they were being called. Karen found me at 3 a.m. sitting at the Kit Heigl table, surrounded by printouts and maps. "Mike, you need to rest," she said gently. "I'm missing something," I told her. "There's a connection I'm not seeing. Why February? Why that exact spot on the highway?" She looked at the maps I'd spread out, the ones showing the location of every abandoned vehicle, every disappearance. "What if it's not about the location? What if it's about the date?" "What do you mean?" "You said the bus accident happened in 1971, when in February." I shuffled through the papers until I found the accident report. February 14th, 1971. Valentine's Day. The same day Sandra Whitmore had disappeared, exactly 20 years later. I started checking the other cases, every disappearance, every abandoned vehicle over the past 20 years. They'd all happened within a week of February 14th. And the vehicles we'd found in the woods, the ones that had been there for years, they'd all been abandoned on or around that date. "The anniversary," I said. "It's all happening around the anniversary of the bus accident." The FBI arrived the next morning. Special Agent Caroline Wright was a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd brought a team of 6 agents with her, along with equipment I didn't recognize. They set up a command post in the Rockland police station and immediately began re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing our evidence. "Sergeant Durant," Agent Wright said after she'd reviewed my reports, "I need you to take me to the quarry. The old Union Street quarry. It's been sealed off for decades. I know, but according to historical records, that's where the bus went in. And according to your map, it's also roughly in the center of where all these vehicles have been found." She was right. When I plotted all the vehicle locations on a map, they formed a rough circle about half a mile in diameter. And at the center of that circle was the old quarry. We drove out to the site that afternoon. The quarry was surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, with faded warning signs posted every 20 feet. "Danger, deep water, no trespassing." But the fence had gaps, places where time and weather had worn through the metal. People had clearly been getting in despite the warnings. Agent Wright produced a pair of bolt cutters from her vehicle and made short work of the padlock on the main gate. We walked down the old access road, our boots crunching on gravel and broken asphalt. The quarry opened up before us, a vast pit filled with dark, still water. The walls were sheer granite, dropping straight down for at least 60 feet before hitting the water's surface. And God only knew how deep the water itself was. "This is where they recovered the bodies?" Wright asked. "Some of them. 17 children died when the bus crashed through the ice. They recovered 14 bodies. 3 were never found." Wright walked to the edge of the quarry, looking down at the water. It was completely opaque, its surface like black glass. Have there been any other incidents here since the bus accident? A few drownings over the years, mostly teenagers sneaking in to swim. The last one was in 1987. That's when they finally upgraded the fencing, but as you can see, it hasn't done much good. I want to bring in divers, Wright said. I want to know what's at the bottom of this quarry. In this weather, the water temperature is probably just above freezing. Then we'll get divers equipped for cold water. Sergeant, every one of those missing people, their trails ended in the woods around this quarry. If they're not still alive out there, then they might be in here. I didn't like it, but she was right. We needed to search the quarry, but something about the dark water made my skin crawl. It felt wrong somehow, like we'd be disturbing something that should be left alone. The dive team arrived 2 days later. They were professionals from the Massachusetts State Police Marine Unit, experienced in cold water recovery operations. I stood on the edge of the quarry with Agent Wright and half a dozen other officers as the divers prepared their equipment. Maximum depth in this quarry is approximately 120 feet, the dive supervisor said. Visibility is going to be essentially 0 below 50 feet. Water temperature is 34 degrees. We'll work in shifts, no more than 30 minutes per dive. The first 2 divers entered the water just after noon. I watched them disappear beneath the black surface, their lights quickly fading from view. The rest of us waited in tense silence, listening to the radio chatter between the divers and their supervisor on shore. Passing 60 feet. Visibility is near 0. We're using handlines and searching by touch. More waiting. The wind picked up, making small ripples across the water's surface. 70 feet. We've got debris down here. Looks like old quarrying equipment. Granite blocks. Moving past it. I found myself holding my breath, though I couldn't have said why. 80 feet, we found something. It's metal, large. Moving in for a closer look. The radio crackled with static for a moment, then one of the divers came back on. His voice sounded strained. "Supervisor, we've found the bus." A murmur went through the gathered officers. After 54 years, they'd finally located the school bus. "What's the condition?" the supervisor asked. It's upright, sitting on a ledge at about 85 feet. The whole front end is crushed, but the rest of the structure is intact. We're going to need to go inside." "Negative," the supervisor said immediately. "That structure could be unstable. I don't want you penetrating the wreck on this dive. Mark the location, and we'll plan a proper recovery operation." "Understood. But Supervisor, there's something else. The bus isn't alone down here. We've got other vehicles. At least 3 or 4. They're all around the bus, like they're arranged in a circle." Agent Wright and I exchanged looks. "Ask them to describe the vehicles," she said into the radio. "Dive team, can you identify the vehicles you're seeing?" "One looks like a pickup truck, relatively modern. Another is definitely a passenger car. Can't tell the make. They're all in a circle around the bus, maybe 15 feet out from it. It's deliberate, has to be. There's no way they all just happen to end up in this configuration." "Are there bodies in the vehicles?" Wright asked. There was a long pause before the diver responded. "Negative. The vehicles appear to be empty. But there's something else. The doors are all open. Every single vehicle down here has its doors open, like someone got out and swam away. Impossible. No one could survive in water that cold, especially at that depth. And how would vehicles have gotten into the quarry in the first place? The fence had been there for decades, and the quarry hadn't been accessible to vehicles since the 1960s. "Come up," the supervisor ordered. "We need to regroup and figure out what we're dealing with." The divers surfaced about 10 minutes later, and I could see the tension in their faces as they climbed out of the water. Once they were out of their gear, the lead diver, a man named Sergeant Tom Perkins, pulled Agent Wright and me aside. "There's something down there that doesn't make sense," he said quietly. "The bus I can understand. It crashed through the ice in 1971. It's been there ever since. But those other vehicles? They're modern. One of them is a Honda Accord. Looks like it's from the mid to late 80s. There's no way that car has been underwater for more than a few years." "Could they have been dumped in the quarry?" I asked. "Pushed in from the edge?" Perkins shook his head. "Not unless someone brought in heavy equipment to do it. These vehicles are 85 feet down, sitting on a narrow ledge. They didn't roll down from the top. They'd have hit the walls on the way down and gotten torn apart. No, these vehicles were placed there, deliberately and carefully." "That's impossible," I said. "I know what I saw," Perkins said firmly. "Those cars are arranged in a perfect circle around the bus. Someone put them there." Agent Wright looked out at the dark water. "We need to identify those vehicles. If we can match them to our missing persons cases, we'll know we're on the right track." "I'll go back down," Perkins said. "I'll get the VINs." The second dive took place an hour later. Perkins went down with another diver, armed with cameras and equipment to document what they'd found. They were down for nearly 40 minutes, and when they surfaced, Perkins immediately started writing down numbers. 4 vehicles total," he said. "I got VINs for all of them, and I took photos, though I doubt they'll show much given the visibility." We ran the VINs through the system. All 4 vehicles matched cars that had been reported missing along Route 3 between 1987 and 1991. The Honda Accord belonged to Sandra Whitmore. She'd been missing for less than a week, and her car was already at the bottom of the quarry, 85 feet underwater, arranged in a circle with 3 other vehicles around a school bus that had been there for 54 years. "This doesn't make any sense," I said. "How is this possible?" Agent Wright was quiet for a long moment, studying the dive reports and the vehicle registrations. Finally, she looked up at me. "Sergeant Durant, do you believe in the supernatural?" "What?" "It's a simple question. Do you believe there are things in this world that can't be explained by science or logic?" I thought about the radio in Patricia Morrison's car, still playing after 4 years with a dead battery. I thought about the voice I'd heard coming through the static. I thought about the footprints in the snow that just ended, with no sign of where the people had gone. "I believe there are things I can't explain," I said carefully. "But I don't jump to supernatural conclusions." "Neither do I," Wright said. "But I've been with the FBI for 15 years, and I've seen some cases that defied every rational explanation. Things that made me question what I thought I knew about the world. And you think this is one of those cases?" She looked back at the quarry. 4 cars at the bottom of a flooded quarry, arranged in a circle around a bus full of dead children. Cars that got there by means we can't explain, on dates connected to the anniversary of a tragedy. People walking into the woods and vanishing without a trace. Radio frequencies that shouldn't work but do. Yes, Sergeant Durant, I think this is one of those cases. That night, Agent Wright's team set up surveillance equipment around the quarry and in the woods near mile marker 42. Cameras, motion sensors, audio recording equipment. If something was happening in those woods, we'd capture it. I went home around midnight, exhausted but too wound up to sleep. Karen was still awake, reading in bed. "You're going to make yourself sick," she said. "You've barely slept in 3 days." "We found the school bus," I told her, "and 4 cars arranged in a circle around it." She put down her book. "How did they get there?" "That's the question. Sandra Whitmore disappeared less than a week ago. Her car is at the bottom of the quarry. There's no way someone could have gotten it down there in that time without us noticing. The quarry is under constant surveillance now, has been since we started the investigation. Maybe the car was down there longer than you think. maybe she disappeared before last week. Her husband reported her missing the day we found her car on the highway. She was seen that morning leaving their house. Karen, she vanished on Valentine's Day, and her car ended up at the bottom of a quarry where a school bus crashed on Valentine's Day 54 years ago. Karen was quiet for a moment. "The children," she said finally. "The 3 who were never recovered. Do you think they're still down there?" "They must be. The bus has been underwater for over 50 years, but I don't know what that has to do with people disappearing now." My phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and saw it was Agent Wright. "We've got something," she said without preamble. "One of the motion sensors in the woods triggered. There's someone out there." I was in my car 5 minutes later, racing toward Rockland with my lights and siren cutting through the night. When I arrived at the staging area near mile marker 42, I found Agent Wright and 3 other agents gearing up. "The motion sensor was triggered about 20 minutes ago," she said, handing me a radio. "We've got a thermal camera showing a single person moving through the woods toward the quarry. They're moving slowly, deliberately, like they know exactly where they're going. Could it be one of the missing women? Maybe. Or it could be whoever's been luring them out there." We moved into the woods as a team, using night vision goggles and following the GPS coordinates from the motion sensor. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and our breath came out in white clouds. The woods were silent except for the crunch of our footsteps in the frozen snow. We found the person near the edge of the quarry. It was a woman, standing at the very edge of the granite cliff, looking down at the water. She was wearing only a thin nightgown, no coat, no shoes. She should have been dead from hypothermia, but she was standing perfectly still, seemingly unaware of the cold. "Ma'am," Agent Wright called out softly. "Can you hear me?" The woman didn't react. She just stood there, staring at the water. We approached carefully. As we got closer, I could see her face in the moonlight. It was Rebecca Torres, the woman who'd disappeared 2 days ago. Her skin was pale, almost blue, and her lips were tinged with purple. But her eyes were open, staring down at the quarry with an expression of absolute concentration. "Rebecca," I said, moving to within a few feet of her. "Rebecca Torres, can you hear me?" Still no response. I reached out slowly and touched her arm. Her skin was ice cold, colder than it should have been even given the temperature and her lack of clothing. It was like touching a corpse. Suddenly, she spoke. Her voice was flat, monotone, utterly devoid of emotion. "They're waiting." "Who's waiting?" Agent Wright asked. "The children. They're still waiting, still cold, still afraid. Rebecca, we need to get you somewhere warm. You're hypothermic. Come with us." But Rebecca shook her head slowly. "They need to be complete. 17 went down, only 14 came up. 3 are still waiting, still cold, still afraid." She took a step toward the edge of the cliff. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Rebecca, stop!" She turned to look at me for the first time, and what I saw in her eyes made me let go and stumble backward. Her eyes were wrong. They were the same shape and color they'd always been, but there was something ancient behind them, something that had been in the cold and dark for a very long time. "They need to be complete," she said again. Then she smiled, an expression that didn't reach her eyes. 17 went down, and then she went limp, collapsing into Agent Wright's arms like a puppet with its strings cut. We carried her back through the woods to the waiting ambulance. The paramedics said her core temperature was 86 degrees. At that temperature, most people would be unconscious or dead, but Rebecca had been standing at the edge of a cliff, perfectly alert, until the moment she collapsed. She was rushed to South Shore Hospital in critical condition. The doctors said it was a miracle she was alive at all. But she wasn't talking anymore. She'd slipped into a coma, and the doctors weren't sure she'd wake up. Agent Wright called a meeting of all the investigators the next morning. We gathered in the command post at the Rockland police station, looking at maps and reports and trying to make sense of what we'd found. 17 went down, Wright said, writing it on the whiteboard. That's what Rebecca Torres said. 17 children died in the bus accident. We've recovered 4 modern vehicles from the quarry so far. We have 2 more missing women whose vehicles we found on the highway but haven't located their bodies. That makes 6 possible victims in the last week alone. What if it's not just the last week? Lieutenant Morrison said. What if it's been happening every year, every February, for the last 20 years? Wright pulled up the historical data we'd compiled. Looking at missing persons reports and abandoned vehicles on Route 3 near mile marker 42, we have confirmed cases going back to 1972, 1 year after the bus accident. On average, 2 to 3 people go missing each year in the week leading up to February 14th. Most cases go cold with no leads. I did the math in my head. 2 to 3 people per year for 20 years. That's 40 to 60 people. At minimum, Wright confirmed. And that's just the ones that were reported. There could be more. So, what's the connection? Asked one of the other agents. Why does this keep happening? What's causing it? Wright turned to look at the map of the quarry on the wall. Rebecca Torres said the children were waiting, that they were still cold and afraid. She said 3 are still down there. Sergeant Durant, when they recovered the bodies from the bus in 1971. How extensive was the search? I pulled out the old accident report. They had divers in the water for 2 weeks. They recovered 14 bodies. The search was called off when the weather got too bad and the water temperature dropped too low. It says here that the 3 missing children were believed to have been swept out of the bus by the current and carried downstream when the Weir River flooded that spring. But the Weir River doesn't flow through the quarry, Wright said. It's 50 yards away. If the bodies had been swept out of the bus by current, they'd have ended up in the quarry drainage tunnel, not in the river. Are you saying the 3 children are still in the quarry? Morrison asked. I'm saying it's possible. And if they are, we need to find them. The dive team went back down that afternoon. This time, they were looking specifically for the 3 missing children. Sergeant Perkins and another diver spent nearly an hour searching the area around the bus and the circle of cars. We've got something, Perkins finally reported. Inside the bus, there's a section in the back that's collapsed. We can see fabric, might be clothing. Can you access it? It's tight, but I think so. Give me a minute. We waited in tense silence. I could hear Perkins's breathing through the radio, heavy and labored from the exertion and the cold. I've got a body, he said finally. It's small, a child, partially buried under debris. Can you recover it? Working on it now. Another long wait, then, coming up, we need body recovery equipment for a child, approximately 8 to 10 years old. They brought up the first body just before sunset. Even after 54 years underwater, it was clearly a child. The cold water and depth had preserved the body better than anyone had expected. It was wearing a red winter coat with a name tag still attached. Jennifer Murphy, age 9. Jennifer had been one of the 3 children never recovered from the bus accident. The discovery of Jennifer Murphy's body changed everything. This wasn't just about missing people anymore. This was about unfinished business, about children who'd been waiting in the dark, cold water for over 50 years. And somehow, impossibly, they were reaching out, pulling others down to join them. That night, I went back through every missing persons case we had on file. The patterns were there once you knew to look for them. February 1972, 1 year after the bus accident. 2 missing. February 1973, 3 missing. February 1974. 2 missing. Year after year, the numbers varied, but people kept disappearing, and now I understood why. 17 went down, I said to Agent Wright as we sat in the command post late that night. 14 bodies were recovered. 3 remained. If what Rebecca Torres said is true, if the children are trying to make themselves complete again, then they need 3 more. But there have been dozens of disappearances over the years, Wright said. Far more than 3. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe they keep trying and failing, so they keep taking more. Wright looked at the timeline we'd created. Or maybe they do succeed, but only temporarily. Maybe they get their 3, but then something happens, the spell breaks or whatever it is fades, and they have to start over. Either way, we've found one of the children. We need to find the other 2. The dive team went back down the next morning. The search of the bus's interior was painstaking and dangerous. The structure had been underwater for over 50 years, and the cold had made the metal brittle. Every movement risked bringing the whole thing down on top of the divers, but they kept searching. And just after noon, they found the second body. Thomas Carter, age 10. He was wedged in a section of the bus that had collapsed during the crash, pinned under a seat. Like Jennifer, the cold, deep water had preserved him far better than anyone had expected. One more, Agent Wright said as they brought Thomas's body up. There's one more child still down there. But as the afternoon wore on, the divers found no sign of the third child. They searched every inch of the bus inside and out. They expanded their search to the area around the bus, checking the vehicles that were arranged in a circle, looking under ledges and in crevices. But the third child wasn't there. Maybe the child wasn't in the bus, Perkins suggested. Maybe they got thrown clear during the crash and ended up somewhere else in the quarry. The quarry is huge, I said. We could search for weeks and not cover it all. Then we need to think about this differently, Wright said. The 2 children we found were in the bus. If the third child isn't in the bus, where would they be? I pulled out the accident report again, reading through the witness statements from 1971. There were 2 adult chaperones on the bus, Mrs. Eleanor Crawford and Miss Rhea Bailey. Mrs. Crawford's body was recovered. Miss Bailey's body was never found. An adult, Wright said, not a child. But still part of the bus accident, still someone who went down and never came up. Wright was quiet for a moment, thinking. Rebecca Torres said 3 are still waiting. We assumed she meant 3 children, but what if she meant 3 people? 2 children and 1 adult. It made a horrible kind of sense. 17 people had gone down with that bus. 15 children and 2 adults. 14 children and 1 adult had been recovered. That left 3 people still in the quarry, 2 children and 1 adult. Where would an adult end up if they were thrown from the bus? Wright asked. I looked at the quarry map. The bus crashed through the ice near the north wall. If someone was thrown clear, the current from the Weir River drainage system would have carried them toward the south end of the quarry. There's a spillway there, leads into an underground drainage tunnel. Can we search it? It's dangerous. The tunnel is narrow, partially collapsed in places, and it's completely underwater. But can we search it? I looked at Sergeant Perkins, who'd been listening to our conversation. He grimaced. It's possible, but it's a technical dive, not something we can just do on the fly. We'll need special equipment, and I'll need a day to plan it properly. Then plan it, Wright said. We need to find that third person. While the dive team prepared for the tunnel search, I went to visit Rebecca Torres in the hospital. She'd woken from her coma the previous evening, but the doctors said she had no memory of the last week. The last thing she remembered was getting in her car to drive to work on Valentine's Day morning. I found her sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. Her mother was with her, holding her hand and crying tears of relief. "Sergeant Durant," Rebecca said when I entered. "They tell me you're the one who found me." "You were at the quarry," I said. "Do you remember anything about how you got there?" She shook her head slowly. "I remember getting in my car. I remember traffic on Route 3 was heavy. And then, nothing. Just darkness and cold and children singing." "Children singing?" It was like a lullaby, but sad. So sad it made me want to cry. I could hear them singing in the dark, and I knew they were afraid. I wanted to help them, but I didn't know how. "Do you remember the words to the song?" Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to remember. Then, in a soft voice, she began to sing. "In the cold, deep water, where the light won't go. In the cold, deep water, where the lost children go. In the cold, deep water waiting to come home. In the cold, deep water we're not alone." Her mother gasped. "That's the song from the memorial." "What memorial?" I asked. "After the bus accident in 1971, the families of the children who died built a memorial at the Rockland cemetery. There's a stone monument with all 17 names on it. And on the base of the monument there's that song inscribed. It was written by one of the mothers who lost a child." I left the hospital and drove straight to the Rockland cemetery. The memorial was easy to find, a large granite monument near the center of the cemetery. 17 names were carved into the stone, along with the date of the accident, February 14th, 1971. And there, at the base, were the words to the song Rebecca had sung. But there was something else. Scratched into the granite, much newer than the original carving, were tally marks. 53 marks in groups of 5, spread across the base of the monument. Someone had been keeping count. I called Agent Wright. "I think I know what's happening. Someone's been tracking the disappearances. There are 53 tally marks on the memorial stone." 53 disappearances over 20 years, Wright said. "That's not a coincidence. No, it's deliberate. Someone knows about the pattern, about the connection to the bus accident, and they've been keeping track. Any idea who?" I thought about it. Who would care enough to keep track of disappearances over 20 years? Who would visit the memorial often enough to add new marks year after year? "The families," I said. "The families of the children who died in 1971. They'd know. They'd remember." It took us 3 hours to track down contact information for all the families. Most had moved away from Rockland after the accident, unable to bear living in the town where their children had died. But 2 families still lived in the area, the Murphys and the Baileys. The Murphys were the family of Jennifer Murphy, the first child we'd recovered from the quarry. The Baileys were the family of Rhea Bailey, the adult chaperone whose body was never found. We went to see Richard Bailey first. He was in his 70s now, living alone in a small house on the outskirts of Rockland. When he answered the door and saw Agent Wright's FBI credentials, his face went pale. "You found her," he said. It wasn't a question. "You found Rhea." "Mr. Bailey, we need to talk to you about your sister," Wright said gently. He let us in. The house was tidy but sparse, with only the essentials. No decorations, no personal touches. It felt more like a place to exist than a place to live. "I've been waiting for this day for 20 years, Bailey said as we sat in his living room, "ever since the first one disappeared." "The first one?" I asked. "February 1972. A young woman named Mary Sullivan. Her car was found on Route 3 near mile marker 42. She was never seen again. I knew what had happened to her. I knew where she'd gone." "You knew about the disappearances," Wright said. "You've been tracking them." Bailey nodded. Every year, they take more. Every year, around the anniversary of the accident. At first, I thought it was my imagination, thought I was seeing patterns where there weren't any. But then it kept happening, year after year. Same stretch of highway, same time of year, and I realized Rhea was still down there, still trying to come home. "Why didn't you report this to the police?" I asked. I did, at first, but nobody believed me. They said I was grief-stricken, traumatized, seeing connections that weren't there, so I stopped reporting it and started tracking it myself. I marked every disappearance on the memorial stone. 53 marks for 53 people over 20 years. "Mr. Bailey," Wright said, "we need to find your sister's body. We think if we recover all 3 of the missing people from the bus accident, the disappearances will stop." Bailey's expression was difficult to read. Hope, fear, relief, all mixed together. "The drainage tunnel," he said. "That's where she'll be." When the bus crashed, Rhea was sitting in the back, near the emergency exit. If she got thrown clear, the current would have carried her straight to the tunnel. "We're planning to search it tomorrow," I said. "I want to be there," Bailey said. "I've waited 20 years. I want to be there when you bring her home." The technical dive of the drainage tunnel was scheduled for 6 a.m. the next morning. The dive team had brought in specialized equipment, full-face masks with communication systems, extra lights, and safety lines. The tunnel was only about 4 feet in diameter, barely wide enough for a person to fit through, and it was completely submerged. Richard Bailey stood on the edge of the quarry as the sun came up, watching the preparations. He looked older than his years, worn down by decades of grief and guilt. Agent Wright stood next to him, her hand on his shoulder. "Whatever we find down there," she said gently, "at least you'll have answers." "I just want to bring her home," Bailey said. "She shouldn't be alone in the dark anymore." Sergeant Perkins and another diver, a woman named Lisa Heigl, entered the water just after dawn. They disappeared beneath the surface, their lights quickly fading from view. The rest of us gathered around the radio, listening to their progress. "We've located the tunnel entrance," Perkins reported. "Starting our penetration now. Visibility is 0, we're navigating by touch." The radio crackled with static. Then, "The tunnel is partially collapsed about 30 feet in. There's debris blocking most of the passage. We're going to have to move some of it to get through." 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The radio gave us periodic updates, but mostly we heard the sounds of their breathing and the occasional clink of equipment. I found myself holding my breath every time there was a long silence. "We're through the blockage," Heigl finally reported. "The tunnel opens up ahead. There's a chamber of some kind. Looks natural, might be part of the original quarry excavation." "What do you see?" "There's something here. Multiple somethings. I'm moving in for a closer look." A long pause. Then Heigl's voice came back, and there was something in her tone that made my skin crawl. "We've found bodies, multiple bodies. They're not from the bus accident." My stomach dropped. "How many?" "I count at least 6. They're in various states of decomposition. Some look recent, others have been here longer, and they're all arranged in a circle, just like the cars." Agent Wright grabbed the radio. "Are any of them Rhea Bailey?" "There's one that's significantly older than the others. Based on the clothing and level of decomposition, it could be from the 70s, but there's something else. In the center of the circle, there's a small space, like a shrine, and there are children's toys, old toys from the 70s. I looked at Richard Bailey. His face had gone completely white. "She's been waiting," he whispered. "All this time she's been waiting with the others." The recovery operation took the rest of the day. One by one, they brought up the bodies from the drainage chamber. 6 modern victims from the last 20 years, and one older one that the medical examiner confirmed was Rhea Bailey based on dental records. But the most disturbing discovery came last. In the center of that underwater chamber, surrounded by the bodies, was a collection of items, children's toys, school supplies, and a lunchbox with the name Thomas Carter written on it in faded marker. Thomas had been one of the children on the bus, one of the two we'd already recovered. "It's a memorial," Wright said as we examined the items. "Someone created an underwater memorial to the bus accident victims, using the bodies of the people who disappeared." "But why?" I asked. "What's the purpose?" The answer came that night. We'd set up surveillance cameras in the drainage chamber after recovering the bodies, wanting to document the site before disturbing it further. Around midnight, those cameras captured something that shouldn't have been possible. The chamber, which had been empty after we'd removed the bodies, wasn't empty anymore. Figures appeared on the thermal camera, small figures the size of children, moving through the chamber in a slow circle. And in the center of that circle, visible on the camera but impossible to explain, was light. Cold blue light that seemed to pulse with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Agent Wright and I watched the footage together, both of us trying to process what we were seeing. "Those are the children," she said quietly. "The ones from the bus, they're still there." "That's impossible." "I know. But look at the thermal signatures. They're cold, much colder than the water around them. And they're moving in a specific pattern, the same pattern as the bodies and the cars." The figures moved in their circle for exactly 17 minutes. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they vanished. The cold blue light flickered once and went out. The chamber was empty again. 17 minutes, I said. 17 children. "They're trapped," Wright said. "Bound to that place where they died. And they've been trying to escape for 20 years, trying to replace themselves with others so they can leave. But it hasn't worked. They keep taking people, but they never leave. Because we didn't recover all the bodies from the bus, as long as some of them were missing, none of them could leave. They're bound together, all 17. And now that we've found Jennifer and Thomas and Rhea, they're still bound because we haven't given them a proper burial." I thought about the memorial in the cemetery, about the 53 tally marks. "The families," I said. "They need to be part of this. They need to say goodbye properly." We spent the next 2 days preparing. The medical examiner released the bodies of Jennifer Murphy, Thomas Carter, and Rhea Bailey to their families. A memorial service was planned at the cemetery where the original monument stood. And Agent Wright arranged for something unusual. She wanted the families of all 17 victims present, along with representatives from the families of the 53 people who'd disappeared over the years. "If we're going to break this cycle," she said, "we need everyone involved. This isn't just about the children on that bus. It's about everyone who's been affected by what happened here." The service was held on February 20th, exactly 1 week after Valentine's Day. Nearly 200 people gathered at the Rockland cemetery, standing in the cold around the memorial stone. The families of the 3 recovered victims stood in front, holding photographs and crying quietly. A local minister led the service, speaking about loss and grief and the importance of letting go. Then, one by one, the family members of all 17 bus victims came forward and placed flowers on the memorial stone. Richard Bailey was last. He laid a single white rose on the stone, then knelt down and touched one of the carved names, Rhea Bailey. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," he whispered. "I'm so sorry you had to wait so long. But you can go home now. You can all go home." That night, Agent Wright and I returned to the quarry. We stood at the edge, looking down at the dark water. The surveillance cameras were still running in the drainage chamber below, and we had the feed on a portable monitor. At exactly midnight, the figures appeared again on the thermal camera. All 17 of them, children and adults alike, moving in their slow circle. But this time was different. The cold blue light in the center of the chamber grew brighter and brighter until it was almost painful to look at, even through the camera. Then the light exploded outward, filling the entire chamber. When it faded, the figures were gone. The chamber was empty, and according to the temperature sensors, the water had warmed by almost 10 degrees in an instant. "It's over," Wright said quietly. "They're free." She was right. After that night, the disappearances stopped. No more abandoned cars on Route 3, no more people walking into the woods and vanishing. The pattern that had persisted for 20 years was finally broken, but the case left scars. Rebecca Torres recovered physically, but she could never drive past mile marker 42 without having panic attacks. 3 other survivors of the disappearances turned up over the following weeks, found wandering in nearby towns with no memory of where they'd been. And there were 47 people who never came back, 47 families who would never have closure. Richard Bailey passed away 6 months later. The doctors said it was a heart attack, but I think he'd just been holding on until Rhea could rest. He was buried next to his sister in the Rockland cemetery near the memorial stone. The quarry was permanently sealed after that. The town filled in the drainage tunnel and reinforced the fencing. The stretch of Route 3 near mile marker 42 was eventually rerouted, bypassing the area entirely. They said it was for safety reasons, but everyone knew the real reason. Some places carry too much darkness, too much tragedy. Some places need to be left alone. 3 years have passed since the events at the quarry. I'm still with the Massachusetts State Police, still patrolling the same highways, still responding to calls. But I'm not the same person I was before February 1991. How could I be, after seeing what I saw, after knowing what I know? Agent Caroline Wright left the FBI 6 months after the case closed. She said she needed time to process everything we'd experienced, needed to step back from the darkness for a while. Last I heard, she was teaching criminal justice at a university in Vermont, though we still exchange emails occasionally. Neither of us has ever spoken publicly about the supernatural aspects of the case. The official reports mention only the recovery of bodies from the quarry, the resolution of multiple missing persons cases, and the closure of a hazardous site. The rest is filed in a classified section that very few people will ever see. The case officially closed in May 1991, but the aftermath went on for years. The bodies of the 47 people who'd disappeared over 20 years were never recovered. Their families were left with the bitter knowledge that their loved ones were gone, but no remains to bury, no graves to visit. The state established a memorial fund for them, and a second monument was erected in the Rockland cemetery listing all their names next to the original memorial for the bus victims. I attended every one of those memorial services. It felt like the least I could do. Each time I stood there looking at the names carved in granite, I thought about the pattern, about how easily it could have continued if we hadn't figured it out in time. How many more names would have been added to that stone if the cycle hadn't been broken? Sandra Whitmore's husband moved away from Massachusetts after her body was never recovered. I got a letter from him about a year after the case closed. He'd remarried, was trying to build a new life in North Carolina. But he said he still had nightmares about his wife walking into those woods, following something that called to her in a voice only she could hear. Rebecca Torres never fully recovered. The physical damage from the hypothermia was relatively minor. Some nerve damage in her extremities, a susceptibility to cold that she'd carry for the rest of her life. But the psychological trauma was profound. She remembered things from her time in the woods, fragments that came to her in dreams. Children's voices singing, the feeling of cold water closing over her head, the absolute certainty that she needed to go deeper, to join the others waiting in the dark. She spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility, then moved to Arizona. She sent me a postcard once, a picture of a desert landscape under a bright blue sky. On the back, she'd written, "Trying to remember what warmth feels like. Some days are better than others." The most difficult part for me was explaining everything to Karen. How do you tell your wife that you've seen ghosts, that you've witnessed the supernatural, that everything you thought you knew about the world was wrong? But she listened, and she believed me. Maybe that's why we've stayed together when so many police marriages fall apart. She saw the truth in my eyes, saw how the experience had changed me, and she accepted it. We moved away from the South Shore a year after the case closed. I transferred to a barracks in western Massachusetts, as far from Route 3 and Rockland as I could get while staying in the state. I told myself it was for career advancement, but Karen knew better. She knew I couldn't drive past mile marker 42 anymore without seeing those dark woods, without hearing the echo of that radio static. But distance doesn't erase memory. Even now, 3 years later, I still dream about the quarry. I dream about standing at the edge, looking down into that black water, knowing that something down there is looking back. I dream about the school bus sitting at the bottom, its windows like empty eye sockets, waiting. I dream about children singing in the dark. The rational part of my brain, the part that was trained in investigation and evidence and procedure, keeps trying to explain what happened in logical terms. Mass hysteria, coincidence, environmental factors we didn't understand. But the part of me that was there, that saw with my own eyes and heard with my own ears, knows better. Some things can't be explained away. Some things are exactly what they appear to be. I've done a lot of research into the paranormal since 1991. Not the sensationalist stuff you see on TV, but serious academic work on death and grief and the nature of human consciousness. I've read about residual hauntings, about energy that gets trapped in places where trauma occurred. I've studied cases from around the world where groups of people died together violently and their spirits seemed unable to move on. What happened in Rockland fits the pattern. 17 people dying together in terror and cold, their last moments filled with panic and confusion. That kind of concentrated trauma leaves a mark on a place, creates a kind of wound in reality. And like any wound, if it's not properly treated, it festers. For 20 years, that wound festered. The children and adults from the bus were trapped, unable to move on because their deaths were incomplete. 3 of them were never recovered, never properly mourned, never laid to rest. So they reached out the only way they could, calling to others, trying to replace themselves, trying to escape the cold, dark water where they'd died. They didn't mean to be evil, I've come to believe that. They were just afraid and lost, children who wanted to go home. But fear and need can twist things, can turn victims into something dangerous. Every year they called out, and every year people answered. Walked into the woods, disappeared into the darkness. And when those people didn't release the children from their trap, when the pattern remained broken, the children had to try again. It was a cycle of tragedy, feeding on itself, year after year. Until we found the missing 3. Until we gave them the burial they should have had 50 years before. Until we let them go. I've often wondered what would have happened if we hadn't figured it out. How many more years would the disappearances have continued? How many more names on that memorial stone? Or would it have eventually stopped on its own, the spirits fading as the people who remembered them died off? But I try not to dwell on those questions. The case is closed. The spirits are at rest. The disappearances have stopped. That should be enough. Should be. But there's one detail that still bothers me. One loose thread that I've never been able to explain. It's probably nothing. Just coincidence. But I can't stop thinking about it. Remember, I mentioned the radio in Patricia Morrison's car, the one I found in the ravine during that first night. The radio that shouldn't have been working, that played static and then a voice that said, "Route 3, mile marker 42, they're waiting." When the forensics team examined that car, they found something interesting. The radio had been modified. Someone had done electrical work on it, bypassing the normal power system and wiring it directly to something. The forensics report wasn't clear on the details, said the wiring didn't make sense, shouldn't have functioned at all. But it did function. I heard it. And more than that, I heard that voice. After the case closed, I went back through the evidence locker and found the radio. It had been removed from the car and sealed in evidence. I shouldn't have done what I did next. It was against protocol. Could have gotten me suspended or worse. But I had to know. I plugged it in. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just silence. I was starting to feel foolish, starting to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, that Karen was right and I'd been half frozen and disoriented that night in the woods. Then the static started. That same distinctive sound, like breathing, in and out, in and out. I should have unplugged it right then, should have put it back in evidence and walked away. But I didn't. I listened. And after about 30 seconds, the static resolved into something else. Music. Faint and distant, but definitely music. A children's song, simple and sad. The same song Rebecca Torres had sung in the hospital. In the cold, deep water, where the light won't go, in the cold, deep water, where the lost children go. I yanked the plug out of the wall so hard I nearly pulled the socket off. My hands were shaking. The radio went silent, but I could still hear that melody in my head. Could still hear those children's voices singing about the cold and the dark and the waiting. I sealed the radio back in evidence that day, and I've never touched it again. As far as I know, it's still sitting in a storage locker somewhere, waiting. Just waiting. Because that's the thing about this case that still keeps me up at night. We broke the cycle. We freed the spirits. The disappearances stopped. But that doesn't mean the darkness is gone. It doesn't mean the quarry is empty. Some places absorb trauma like a sponge absorbs water, and no matter how much you wring it out, there's always something left behind. The quarry is sealed now. The drainage tunnel is filled in. The section of Route 3 where it all happened has been rerouted, but on certain nights when the wind is right and the temperature drops below freezing, people claim they can still hear something from those woods. A sound like singing, children's voices, soft and sad, carrying across the frozen landscape. I don't patrol that area anymore. I made sure of that. But sometimes, when I'm working the night shift and I'm driving alone on a dark highway, I find myself thinking about those woods, about what's buried there, both literally and figuratively, about the thin line between the world we see and the world that exists just beneath the surface. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm sitting at a red light or pulled over on the shoulder to do paperwork, I hear static on my patrol car radio. Just for a second, just a brief burst of white noise, and I wonder if it's really over. I wonder if it ever will be. Last month, I got a call from Agent Wright. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, so I was surprised to hear from her. She asked if I'd seen the news out of Vermont, where she was teaching. I told her I hadn't. "There's been a series of disappearances," she said, "near Lake Champlain, people abandoning their cars on the highway and walking into the woods, all around the same time of year." My blood went cold. When? Mid-February, around the 14th. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "How many?" "3 so far. The state police are investigating, but they're stumped. No leads, no pattern they can see, but, Caroline, I see the pattern. It's the same as Rockland, the same as Route 3. I closed my eyes, feeling that old familiar dread settle over me like a weight. The quarry. Is there a quarry near where the disappearances are happening? Yes, an old marble quarry flooded in the 1960s. And Mike, there was an accident there. A tour boat sank in 1972. 19 people died. They recovered most of the bodies, but she trailed off. But not all of them, I finished. Not all of them. We were quiet for a moment, both of us thinking the same thing. The pattern wasn't unique to Rockland. It wasn't unique to Route 3. It was something that could happen anywhere there was trauma, death, and unfinished business. Anywhere people died together in cold water and weren't properly mourned. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," Wright said. "I'm not FBI anymore, I'm just a teacher. But I can't ignore this, Mike. Not after what we saw." "No," I agreed, "we can't." She gave me the details, the location, the names of the local investigators, the timeline of disappearances. I wrote it all down, knowing that I should stay away, that it wasn't my jurisdiction, that I'd already given too much of myself to these cases, but also knowing that I wouldn't stay away, couldn't stay away. Because if there was even a chance I could stop it from happening again, stop another 20 years of families waiting for loved ones who would never come home, I had to try. That was 2 weeks ago. I've requested a temporary transfer to Vermont, citing personal reasons. Karen understands. She always understands. She kissed me goodbye this morning and made me promise to call every day, to be careful, to come home in one piece. I promised her I would try, because that's all any of us can do in the face of this kind of darkness. We can try, we can fight. We can shine lights into places that have been dark for too long and hope that we're strong enough to face what we find there. The drive to Vermont will take about 4 hours. I'm writing this in my motel room in western Massachusetts, preparing to leave in the morning. I wanted to get all of this down, to document everything that happened in Rockland before I potentially walk into another situation like it. If something happens to me, if I don't come back, at least there will be a record. At least someone will know the truth. I've been a Massachusetts state trooper for 20 years now. I've seen car accidents that would make you sick. I've arrested murderers and drug dealers and every kind of criminal you can imagine. I've knocked on doors in the middle of the night to tell people their loved ones are never coming home. I thought I'd seen the worst of what this world had to offer. But the worst isn't what humans do to each other, terrible as that can be. The worst is what happens when death goes wrong, when trauma leaves a scar that won't heal, when spirits get trapped in the moment of their dying and can't move on. The worst is what happens when the boundary between life and death becomes thin and permeable, when the dead reach out to the living and the living answer. That's what I learned on Route 3. That's what I learned at the quarry in Rockland. And that's what I'm afraid I'm going to learn again in Vermont. But I have to go, because those 19 people who died in that marble quarry in 1972, they deserve to rest. And the people disappearing now, they deserve to be saved. And the families waiting for answers, they deserve closure. It's what I signed up for when I became a state trooper, to serve and protect, even if what I'm protecting against isn't something they taught us about at the academy. I'll end this account here. It's almost midnight, and I need to get some sleep before the drive tomorrow. Agent Wright is meeting me in Burlington at noon. We're going to review the case files together, visit the quarry, try to piece together what's happening before more people disappear. I don't know what we're going to find, but I know it's going to be cold and dark and frightening. I know there will be spirits down there who are afraid and lost, who've been waiting in the darkness for decades. And I know that somewhere in those cold, deep waters, there are bodies that need to be recovered and laid to rest. It's the same pattern, just a different place, different victims, different year, but the same underlying horror. And maybe that's the real terror here. Not that it happened once in Rockland, but that it keeps happening. That there are places like this all over the country, all over the world, where tragedy leaves a mark that never fully fades. But if there's one thing I learned from the Route 3 case, it's that these patterns can be broken. It's not easy and it's not safe, but it can be done. You find the missing, you give them rest, you honor the dead and comfort the living, and slowly, gradually, you heal the wound. That's what I'm going to try to do in Vermont. What Agent Wright and I are going to try to do together. We're going back into the darkness, armed with nothing but our experience and our determination and our refusal to let this keep happening. I don't know if we'll succeed, but I know we have to try. Because somewhere in Lake Champlain, in the cold, deep water where the light won't go, there are people waiting to be found, waiting to be saved, waiting to go home. And I'm going to help them, even if it costs me everything. My name is Sergeant Michael Durant, Massachusetts State Police. If you're reading this, then either I made it back and decided to share this account, or something went wrong in Vermont, and this document is all that's left of my investigation. Either way, you know the truth now. You know what happened on Route 3 in Rockland, Massachusetts. You know about the quarry and the bus and the children who waited in the cold, dark water for 50 years. And you know that it might not be over, that it might never be over, that there are places in this world where the dead don't rest easy, where tragedy leaves a wound that continues to bleed. If you're driving on Route 3 through Rockland, past where mile marker 42 used to be, remember this story. Remember the people who disappeared there. Remember the children who died in that cold water and spent decades trying to find their way home. And if you ever abandon your car on the side of a highway, if you ever feel compelled to walk into dark woods for reasons you can't quite explain, if you ever hear children singing in places where no children should be, remember what I learned. Sometimes the dead are calling. And sometimes, God help us, the living answer. Drive safe out there. Keep your doors locked. And if you see abandoned cars on the highway with the keys still in the ignition, call the police immediately. Because every one of those vehicles is a story, and every story is a tragedy waiting to unfold. The case that haunts me isn't over. It's just waiting, in cold, deep water, in dark, silent woods, in places we've forgotten and places we never knew existed. It's waiting, and sometimes, late at night, I can still hear it calling. Can you?